Welcome back to the Practical Enneagram. Here's someone I really appreciate a lot for the way she makes the Enneagram functional in people's lives. Steph Barron Hall combines her study of the Enneagram with a deep study and understanding of the field of communication, organisational communication. The human behind the phenomenally successful Enneagram Instagram account, 9 Types Co., with over 300,000 followers, Steph delivers Enneagram training to teams as well as offering individual coaching and typing services. She's also made a practical online course, the Enneagram in Real Life. Find her through her website, 9types.co, no www. And her podcast, The Enneagram in Real Life. She's also authored an Enneagram book, The Enneagram in Love. Links to everything in the episode notes. It's always particularly interesting for me to talk with people who are able to bring an in-depth study of a separate knowledge system or discipline to the Enneagram. The product is usually something unique, a slightly different emphasis. This interview did not disappoint in that regard. Definitely listen to the practices at the end, as these are not your average communication practices.
So I've always loved personality everything. Like from when I was a kid, I remember I had this little book that was like, if you like orange, it means this about your personality, or if you write your A's this way. So even from that age, I was just fascinated. Like, what can we learn about ourselves and know about ourselves? For that reason, I went to undergrad for psychology and definitely wanted to become a clinical psychologist. Quickly realized school's expensive and, all those sorts of things. And so, when I entered working, though, I was just so fortunate to come across these organizations that use personality assessments within their employee and managerial development. And so that was really what brought me into it. The Enneagram in particular, though, I started out because I had this idea of let me just make coffee mugs for each of the types. I didn't have the same theories or thought processes around it that I do now. But I just made these coffee mugs. And so that's when I started 9 Types Co. When I really in earnest started posting about the Enneagram was probably late 2018, early 2019. And within 1 year, I went from 1,000 to 100,000 followers. And it was during a time when what we see now as what Instagram kind of is in a lot of ways, which is these graphics with these different quotes or text or whatever, that was just beginning then. Before I even started, those things weren't as popular. And I was even told early on, well, you're never going to get any followers, you're never going to get any reach because photos work on Instagram. And I was like, well, this works for me, so I'm just going to do it.
I'd completely forgotten that. And now it's a wash with graphic. That's great. I love it. You're a beautiful type 3. Anything you want to share about being 3 or the rest of your coordinates? So your instincts, and if you do wings, that tri-type, if you do that, I don't know whether you do.
So when I just took an online test. I didn't know, so my sister was like, you have to take the Enneagram. So I said, okay. And it spit out the achiever. And I was like, yes, I won. Classic. Right. And then pretty quickly I started reading more and I was like, ooh, I hate this. I felt very exposed. And I've talked to so many 3s who feel this way, feeling like, oh my gosh, people can see me. I thought that this image I was projecting was really working, realizing 1, not everyone does it that way, but 2, that other people can see behind that, and recognizing for myself that maybe that's a bit of a facade, and as well experiencing that maybe other people see that too.
Yeah, the trauma of those initial moments of finding yourself in a type wasn't that long ago for me, because it was just 2 years that I sort of landed in what I feel my correct type. Yeah, it's embarrassing having a personality, and it never stops.
Truly. Well, yeah. And I thought that maybe I was a 4 because there are a lot of very 4-ish things about me. I know that I'm not a 4, but there are some things that do quite resonate, especially when you look on the surface. So anyhow, it took me a while going back and forth. And then for a short period, I was like, am I actually a self-preservation 7? And then, going back, okay, well, am I actually type 6 in some ways? When I actually talk with a 6, I don't see myself there, but there are some things that are quite 6-ish about me. And then just kind of bringing all this into focus and seeing these different layers, different parental overlays, different ways that I was like kind of raised to be these different ways. For a while, I could not figure out my subtype. Initially, I was typed as self-preservation. Again, it was from an assessment. This was a few years ago. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess self-preservation 3 does fit, and it still fits quite well. Then for a second, I thought I was social because of the image thing, like the social 3 being like doubling down on the image piece, thinking a lot about hierarchy and authority and power and like being able to navigate that and being so aware of that about who has the power in the room, et cetera. I think there is something to that for me, but actually just maybe these past few months, I've been like, okay, let the core challenges of my type really obfuscate my instinct, right? So then I started looking, how does it actually play out? How does that actually work out in day-to-day life? Like, what are my biggest challenges? It became really clear, like the sexual subtype. So yes, I think that the social is repressed. So, and it's been really, really clarifying and really helpful for me too, because, when I first started my Instagram, it was anonymous. Some people that I knew did not even know it was me. If I meet you on the street and you ask me what I do, I'll say, oh, I do communication consulting. Oh, like with teams? Yeah, so I work with teams. Have you heard of the Enneagram? Okay, well, I teach that. I would never say I have 300,000 followers on Instagram. You know what I mean? And that's a very social 3 thing that they would be like, look at how awesome this is. And for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes me want to puke. Even just like the nature of being self-employed is that you have to invite people to pay you, right? You have to consistently be making those invites and those interchanges. And it feels so cringy for me to do that. And I have to go back and reconnect with my past clients and look at, okay, these are the transformations that they made. And I'm not inviting people just to give me money. I'm inviting them to these transformations. I'm sure they can get it somewhere else. And I also know that they can get it through this. And so really flipping that narrative. So all that to say, I resonate a lot with the sexual 3, as well as, I would say if I have a wing, probably more 4, though in some ways it doesn't resonate at all. In some ways it really resonates. So yeah, this is just one of the weird things about being a 3 in spaces where people know the Enneagram. People have said to me things like, oh, of course you want credit for your work, you're a 3. Or of course you offers that you're trying to sell, you're a 3. And it's so funny because I'm like, well, this is a business. Whereas in the general public and general population, I probably wouldn't have that same response from people. It is definitely, I have experienced, and I know other people that I know have experienced having their type weaponized against them in that sense.
Yeah. A lot of people are doing a bit more, maybe procrastinating and not working towards their goals than maybe the average 3 is, and the 3s get resentment for that, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, for me, a huge thing is like, I believe everyone deserves credit for their work. Like, I remember one time getting in an argument with somebody because they were like, well, all Enneagram material is common domain. And I said, it is absolutely not. If you read something in a book, you have to quote, like, does not compute for me. Everyone deserves credit for their work. And so same for me, of course, because I'm like, it's not about me, it's about everyone. And maybe that's like, I do think that's part of the 3 type structure. But yeah, I think that's just something that comes up a lot. And I think when we use the Enneagram that way, we miss things in ourselves.
Yeah.
If we think, oh, well, I'm not X type, so I don't struggle with that.
Wise words. But communication, so, is our focus. Before I jumped on the call with you, I just thought I'll see what Wiki defines communication as. And unusually deep definition: communication is an apparent answer to the painful divisions between self and other, private and public, and inner thoughts and outer world.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But you have a master's degree in communication. So how did that come about?
I knew that I wanted to use the Enneagram with teams. Back when I was even in undergrad, I really want to use personality systems with teams. That was kind of always my aim. And then, a couple of years after I started, or maybe actually just 1 year after I started 9 Types, so back in 2018, people started asking me to come talk to their groups or talk to their team or whatever. And so pretty quickly, I realized I love doing this. I love the aha moments that people experience when they're like, oh, that's why I do that. Or, oh, that's why that conversation with this coworker didn't go well. And so I heard about this program, the one that I ended up going through, and I thought, okay, that sounds like a great fit. And what's really interesting is, in a lot of ways, the program that I did is really similar to industrial organizational psychology, in that communication is very interdisciplinary. So there are a lot of psychological theories that we pull from, a lot of sociological theories. So I think what people don't understand about communication is how many different theoretical models that we use to be able to describe what is actually happening, in even using different words, different phrases and all these different things. There's so much there, so much beneath the surface that we don't think about. And so that's really what the study of communication is about. And fusing it with the Enneagram, I think has been incredibly impactful for me, because it has really shifted kind of the way that I approach it with teams. They don't know, of course, that I have these theoretical models that I'm pulling off of, but that's very much a part of the way that I teach.
Yeah. And do you I guess you do have to know people's types in the teams to be able to do that, right?
Yes and no. So I think it's really important to know your own type, of course. So the way that I approach that topic is, one, understanding your motivation, I think automatically implies that other people have a different motivation. Simply operating from the assumption that other people think about things differently and approach things differently is really helpful. But then also, what I see so often in teams, especially in communication, is, and even in interpersonal communication, in my own life, right? This happens all the time, where I ascribe my motivation to somebody else's behavior. So say I am the type of person who, when I'm really angry, I get quiet, kind of shut down, which is funny that if my husband listens to this, he would be like, no, that's not you. But anyway, this is hypothetical. So say I'm that type of person, right? And I notice I'm in a meeting and I look across the table and somebody across the table is very shut down. They are not speaking much. I am like, oh my gosh, they're angry, right? Because I'm taking my motivation and putting it on their behavior. Instead of thinking, maybe they have questions, maybe they're thinking, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe something happened this morning, before they got to work. But if I start interacting with them as if they're already angry, that ruins the communication environment. But 2, it causes a lot of misunderstandings. It sows distrust. It causes just all this frustration and agitation that is really unnecessary. So simply understanding they have something else happening, simply understanding that they even might have something else happening, helps me to approach it with a little bit of a more objective and an empathetic perspective, rather than thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to go out through this environment and just assume things about other people. This concept is not new, right? It's not something that's novel necessarily, but I think the Enneagram really gives us a framework and a reason to point back to something to say, not only do I just kind of think about this, but I actually deeply know this. I know that this dynamic is happening. Allowing people to have that way of really consciously thinking about it is super helpful.
Oh, I like this a lot. So it sounds like the focus is around helping people to understand their subjectivity, so what they're bringing into the communication field.
Yeah. So there's all this research, right, about how in any meeting, intrapersonal communication, so inside yourself, is happening simultaneously with interpersonal communication. And of course, we know this. We talk about self-talk. We talk about the inner critic, but we don't really think about that really consciously or cognitively when we go into these meetings. We're not thinking about having our own individual self-talk. So even just becoming more aware of that, I think, can really help improve the communication environment overall.
That's like a high level skill, actually, what you're describing there. So are you teaching people how to do that, how to be aware of their inner communication?
this is like kind of pulling back the curtain a bit, because I go in and I teach the Enneagram. I talk about the motivations. I talk about what this type is avoiding. Like I talk about those things that are the Enneagram thought processes. But what I'm really doing is saying, okay, here's this tool. And this is all of what Enneagram teaching is. So this concept of symbolic interactionism, it's looking at the symbol. So almost looking at the type 3, for example, as a symbol, and using it to get really curious, like using it almost like a mirror. So if I say, I'm type 3, then I can interact with that and get curious, like, okay, what of that is true of me? Like what fits? I'm getting curious. I'm looking deeper. I'm reflecting, and it's really inviting me to look at parts of myself that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. And then I can say, yes, these things are true, or no, these things aren't true. And by the way, either way, it's fine. Like whenever I talk about the Enneagram, I always invite people to say, one, look at if you are denying something because it's actually not true of you, or if you're denying it because your psyche doesn't want you to see it. Those are two different things, and both are possible. Like it's totally possible for me to say something about a 4, especially about a 4, that is not true, right? And that's fine. But the whole conversation is around inviting you to then leave that conversation to say, this is how I communicate. This is how I operate. I'm not telling people to go back into their teams and their communication environments to overly identify with a type, but to be able to describe themselves really well so that they can understand themselves and communicate better with their coworkers.
Oh, I like it. I don't know what I was expecting, but I suppose I don't work in organisations at all. And I always assume, and this is bad of me, that there has to be a little bit of not dumbing down of the depth of the Enneagram, but a little bit of that, of just making it accessible, let's say.
When you only have an hour, which is pretty common in corporate, then that does happen at times. But I do like to give a lot of resources so that the people who are really curious and interested to know more can do so.
What does it mean to communicate well?
I think, for me as a 3, it's something that has required me to listen a lot more and to slow down. And I think that's one of the most important things. Each type has their own specific way, their own kind of ruts that they get into with communication. For me, I think because I am a heart type, there is a lot of like reading of what emotional or energetic information am I picking up? But it's digging a little bit deeper and listening for what's not really being said. And some people are naturally really good at that. And the type of person who is like, say what you mean what you say. I don't want to read between the lines. And in fact, if you try to make me read between the lines, I will totally miss it. I will miss it. Like I do not do that super well. That was not the communication environment of my family growing up. But I think part of communicating well is the agility to be able to learn and grow and be really curious about different people and to change the way that you naturally do it. That's probably not a fantastic answer, but
you answered it purely from the personal perspective. So what it means for you, a lot of it was slowing down, listening. Our teachers, so the people that we've both studied with at one stage, B and Uranio, did a episode on this, funnily enough, recently. Have you listened to it yet? The communication
Yes.
one? Yeah.
It's so funny. I was like so validated because I was like, I have that in my presentation. I have that.
They did a good job. Of course they did. And then when Uranio said, one and 4s often say something disparaging about themselves and it doesn't do them any favors. Like I catch myself doing that constantly. I need to get like a money jar that I can put £1 in every time I do.
Can you imagine? Where are you going to go on vacation when you have a jar full?
So what it might mean for me to communicate well, lots of things, but that's maybe one of them. So cut that out. But also, what is it? Be clearer as well, Steph. That's something I've had to maybe really work on a lot. Doing these interviews has been a real mirror for me on this side in noticing all of my dodgy communication habits. I still do them, but
really genuinely, like having a podcast, it's such a good learning experience, but it is very like, stop doing that, every time.
being present's really important, isn't it? As a general principle, being present. And I know that's thrown around a lot, but there was a really good book I read once called The Four Agreements. Have you read that book?
It is on my shelf and I haven't read it yet. It's so short. I need to just dive in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. And the emphasis is on telling the truth and say what you mean what you say, actually, very in line with what your default setting is.
But just to bring some more light to that is in a lot of ways, we think like it's morally better to be that way or something, right? But actually that's very cultural. So in some cultures, that is actually quite rude. And there are different ways to communicate things that aren't that way. So I don't want to make it seem like there's some hierarchy to that. And I think it's all about understanding, the way that you can communicate in a way that is aligned with integrity, that's emotionally intelligent, that is valuing other people and valuing yourself. Like all of those things I think are really important within your cultural context. So it's not to say that, in cultures where there is a different perspective on that, or where the really high context communication, meaning what is actually communicated verbally is highly dependent on the context, and you're expected to get a lot more information from the context that you're in. People in those cultures, if they were to just barge in and say what they mean and mean what they say, that wouldn't go over well, and it actually would not be very culturally intelligent or empathetic or any of those things. So I think this is what makes communication really tricky, and talking about it really tricky, is because we have Enneagram type, we have these different motivations, and we also have the cultural overlays, not only from individual family cultures, but also like culture in the broader sense. For example, type 7s are always categorized as rude for interrupting, but in some cultures, that's an expectation. Definitely in the US in a lot of ways, and in the UK perhaps as well, there's like that expectation, like to interrupt is rude. In some cultures, like if you're not interrupting, you're not valuing the conversation, right? So I just I always just think about these things. And this is what makes this topic so complex, is because there are so many different layers. And so, I just wanted to throw that out there too.
Why does having a type inform the way that we communicate?
Yeah, it's really interesting because given, that I just mentioned all these different complexities around culture, it is hard to boil down at times. When I started talking about this on Instagram, and I'll just share too, in like 2019, I wrote a post on communication.
The viral one.
Yeah. So my following went from 10,000 to like 20,000 within a week. And then I posted something similar, a couple months later. And again, the amount of people following me like doubled again. So I think then it went from 30 to 60. And I quickly saw, one, that people wanted that type of information, but two, communication is everything. It's the way that we relate with the world. Kind of like that quote that you read at the beginning. Maybe I don't have all those exact same words to describe it, but in a lot of ways, communication is how we relate with others. It is how our type is expressed. So that's why it matters, because it's not just an aspect of our lives, but it is truly, when we think of communication as a whole, the way we get ideas from ourselves and concepts from ourselves to others, and the way we relate with others, like all those sorts of things, I think really infiltrate everything about our lives. So I think that's why it matters, and why having a type impacts our communication, is because it really impacts our behavior and like what we care about and what we're driven toward. And so when I think about communication, it's not just the words that we say, which that does change depending on the type, right? But it's everything, it's the entire way that we kind of function in a lot of ways.
I completely agree with you. It's like the surface area of us, isn't it? The way that we communicate, and then relates also to a recent episode you did on the things that we pay attention to, right? Like the things that we pay attention to, that's going to come out in the way that we communicate and what we're listening for. The image that we all want to project, not just threes, all of us are projecting an image through our communication. Right. The fixation, the passion, all of that is probably apparent in communication at some point as well. Yeah. So what else is informing the way we communicate? It's also cultural context, I guess, education as well, our education,
absolutely,
trauma that we had around expressing ourselves, lots of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many things. I think, culturally, like I've mentioned more broadly, but also I do think family culture is really, really important. So So I mentioned earlier, like low context and high context communication, meaning low context means that the information the receiver is meant to gather is from the words that are spoken, not necessarily from the environment. High context is the information the receiver is meant to gather is majority like from the context, the different nonverbals that are happening, and only a small bit from the actual words that are spoken. That's kind of a simplified way of looking at it, right? So if you look at our families on paper, in a lot of ways, you might see a lot of similarity between my family and my husband's family of origin. But, we're from different areas, all this different stuff. But my family is very low context. We talk about everything. We talk about where are we going to go for dinner. We talk about that for 45 minutes before we leave. Like it's just like everything gets talked to the nth degree. And so that's just very much the way that I grew up. My husband's family is not that way. So one day I was there. I think this was before we were married. We were there, we were visiting. We lived out of town and we were sitting there on the sofa. His dad came home and said, "No dinner yet?" Basically saying his mom hadn't started dinner. And she was just like, "Mm-mm." And then he's like, "Okay." Like, this is like not malicious, whatever. It's just like very just quiet. 10 minutes later, everyone is in the car in the garage. And I'm still on the sofa. Right. Because I don't know what's happening. And Brandon, he comes in and he's like, "Hey, like, you ready?" And I was like, "What's happening?" And in that like small nonverbal, it was communicated, we're going to go out to eat for dinner.
Wow.
And we're all just going to pile in the car and we're going to figure out where to go on the way. And it's not going to be much of a discussion. And that works for them. But I was left sitting there confused. I had no idea what was happening. And, again, and there are other layers to that too, but like, I just think it's really interesting to think about that in that way, like how much our family of origin impacts just simply the way that we function in those different environments. So I think that's one of the big ones that we sometimes don't talk about enough.
That's fascinating. Instincts. So it's interesting to think whether the position of that social instinct matters here with communication, and being a heart type, whether that's relevant. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, and I want to be careful not to make too many overgeneralizations, but I do find a lot of the time self-preservation dominant people tend to be a little bit more measured and thoughtful. They tend to not be the people who like just yell something out. And this is based on, not only working with a lot of people, but also doing a lot of typing interviews and seeing how this plays out. I think social do tend to talk more about the collective we, and the things that they get really passionate about have to do with that too. And then I find that sexual, they tend to be a little bit more looking for the spark, right? They're looking for like, okay, maybe they're pushing the envelope a little bit more sometimes. Maybe they're saying things that are a little bit more of the moment, a little bit less planned out. So those are kind of like my surface level thoughts. But I think that it matters. And I also find that, again, this is just from doing typing interviews, heart types, even threes, do talk a little bit more about emotional language. Self-preservation threes in particular, if I ask them questions, they typically only answer about work. But otherwise, I find that, the heart types tend to have more of that emotional language, have more of that image or identity language. 5, 6, 7s, they look in the back of their head for the answers.
I've never noticed that.
It's probably not true of every single head type, but I do see that a lot. And there's also, they just have like more analytical responses in general. And I know that sometimes people forget about 7s with that, but 7s are very analytical, that they're in their heads. And then I find that 8s, 9s, and 1s, they can be quite different, but I do think that there can be a little bit more of being a bit practical, a little bit more straightforward. 9s sometimes are the exception to that, but even still, like especially self-preservation 9s tend to be a little bit more practical. Sometimes the social 9s I feel like are very floaty and fluffy, and you're like, "Hey, come back, hello." So if we went down to the type level, I'm sure that there could be more insights that we could draw. But
those are good. Yeah. You tend to get in the Enneagram world, when we're talking about communication, the advice tends to be, this is how you communicate with these other types, or these are your own strengths and communication weaknesses. What's your view on what's the more important emphasis here, and also what influences what we might choose to prioritize?
Specifically in our really close relationships, it can be really helpful, again, not to sort of manipulate the conversation, but to give that other person what they need. If I know that going down a laundry list of things, a 4 in my life or a 1 in my life, if I go down a laundry list of things that they're doing wrong, that's going to crush them. Like I wouldn't want to do that. Whereas if I talk with an 8 that I'm close with, I could just be like, it wouldn't be a laundry list, but it could be like, hey, this impacted me this way. And there's a lot more of that space. And so figuring out how to adapt that communication to those different people, I think is something we naturally do. And maybe I, as a 3, have a different perspective on that. I think to some people it does feel dishonest, but I think meeting people where they're at is really, really helpful. And also, when I talk about things like conflict triggers or these different things, people will say things like, well, how do I just tip? Like sometimes I have to tell a 1 that they hurt me. My response to that is yes. Like I don't want people to then use that information to tiptoe around their loved ones, right? Or to try to never set them off or these different things. It's more so giving them understanding and empathy for each other, and then learning again, how do you describe how you communicate? How do you describe how you'd like to be communicated with? Not saying that everyone needs to match that or meet that in some way, but having those more open conversations. So I guess with all of this work that I do around communication is having more open communication with how we communicate.
So communication practices for each type. Do you think we've got time for that?
It's always hard to say just one.
Yeah.
Because I like to keep all the nuance and the depth.
Where do you usually start when you teach the types, by the way?
When I teach, I start with 8. But when I'm on Instagram, it just depends because people flip out because they don't know. Like so many people call themselves an expert in the Enneagram, but they've never heard of intelligence centers. And so I'm like, they're like, where is type 1? Okay. Right. Okay. So, for type 8, probably the most impactful thing is getting more comfortable with your own emotional experience and with vulnerability within yourself, because that enables you to be more connected and less rushed when you are communicating with other people. So then type 9, getting more clear within yourself on what you actually think and being more definitive about what you think about things. Especially in the workplace, 9s really struggle with saying yes or no. And in the workplace, actually, I find that a lot of 9s, especially if they're in leadership, they really muster up all of their energy and courage and everything, and they can show up very differently from how they show up in their interpersonal relationships, but they end up exhausted. But they can also do a thing where they don't want to say no. And so they say maybe, or we'll see, or maybe later, and they just don't say no. And so sometimes just being a little bit more definitive, recognizing in yourself the answer is no, and then sharing that with somebody else. With 1s, ask more questions. 1s often go back to yes or no, this is accurate or inaccurate, instead of being like, actually, what do you mean by that word? Because a lot of 1s are not going to say something that they don't fully believe or stand behind. So they expect that anything anyone else says fits that bill, but it doesn't necessarily. It could be any range, depending on who you're talking with, of just a whimsical thought versus something that's really based in data. So asking more questions before you say yep or nope, 2s, being a little bit more direct, especially with feedback. 2s love to get sandwich feedback, the positive, the negative, the positive, but recognizing that that's not really supportive for a lot of people. And in my experience with teams, most people will say that they prefer to receive direct feedback, but a lot of us have a really hard time giving it.
Makes sense.
3s, slow down, be patient. Like you have got to slow down. And we have a really hard time with that because we're always thinking about the next zillion things we have to do. And people always give me this feedback. Like you always talk about work for 3s. No, as a 3, you always hear it through that lens, because a lot of the time I'm not talking even about work. I'm saying when you are at home and you are getting stuff done around your house, the same impatience can come out, the same like get to the bottom line thing can come out. So being able to slow down can be really impactful. For fours, okay, I'm so curious to hear what you think. But I think with fours, one of the things that's really cool about them is they're very resilient. Like they're able to keep going back, even when they feel misunderstood. And being misunderstood can be really devastating for a four, I think. But there can be that desire to keep continuing to make things really clear. And with that, there can be a lot of frustration. So at times it might just be like, okay, well, this person might not understand you, and you can let it go a little bit and try and move forward, especially if it's not a super close relationship, rather than continually trying to get frustrated as you're trying to get that person to understand.
That's a great practice for fours. Yeah.
Fours also use a lot of artful language to describe everything that they think about, which I think is really cool. Sometimes in my normal life, I pull out the big words and stuff because it's the only word I can think of. But a lot of the time I go on podcasts and I'm like, gosh, I don't sound sometimes like I have a master's degree. But if you have a four, you're going to hear all of those, the language and the intelligence and the verbiage come out because they just pick such good words. Okay. For fives, communicate verbally a little bit more. I see this a lot with fives where they really need to withdraw. They need to isolate. They need to pull back, right? But they haven't communicated that very well to others, and they end up just doing it without letting somebody else know, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And of course, there can be that conversation of saying, this is something that's absolutely necessary for me. And whether you like it or not, basically, I have to do this. But a lot of the time, fives would rather not have that conversation and just disappear. So sometimes if they want to keep the relational connection that they have cultivated with somebody else, it can be helpful to actually communicate like, hey, I need this, and to talk about that a bit more, make it a little bit more explicit. Sixes, fours and sixes are tough, like they can be so different. But I think with sixes, recognizing the ways that you can trust people and not only the ways that you can mistrust. And so it might not seem on the surface like it's about communication, but I think for sixes, there is that constant scanning that's happening. Obviously, they're not necessarily aware of it. But, ticking off the boxes of like, this person showed up, this person was honest, all these different things. And I guess that brings me to another point, which is that sixes a lot of the time really want predictability and consistency from other people, and they don't give it to other people. And they can be a little bit sporadic or whatever. And so recognizing that sometimes. And then for type 7, I think that sevens are always in brainstorming mode, which I love because I am an idea person too. So I just want to go around and talk about all the ideas. Yet they're moving so quickly that they're not really thinking to describe that they are in brainstorming mode to other people. And so other people in their life are left kind of thinking like, oh, wait, so I'm supposed to like act on this or we're actually doing this or whatever. And for the 7, it was a fleeting idea, but everyone else is left kind of in the lurch. I see this especially with 5s and 6s and 1s, except for the sexual 6, but the other 6 subtypes and 1s and 5s, when they talk with 7s, they're like, wait, what are you talking about? Like they just get confused because all of those other types, they tend to be really like, if something is being said, it's something that they actually are genuinely considering and thinking about. And 7s just don't operate that way. Again, it's kind of like the 5 thing. It's communicating about communicating, like letting other people know that, oh, this is just a thought, that sort of thing. And I guess another one for 7s is switch, but at least for and. So anytime you spill your coffee and you're like, but at least I had a coffee, say, and I'm so glad I got at least a couple of sips of that coffee today. Or, and, I'm so glad I'm wearing black pants. And it's silly, right? Because it doesn't seem like it makes that much of an impact, but I always try to work with 7s on expanding the emotional range 1%. And that is like one of those 1% swaps where it's instead of doing the whole reframe, you can just do like that little bit of a reframe.
Sneaking suspicion that your hubby a 7, Steph? You
No,
talking
he's
a
a
lot of love.
1.
I don't know why I thought that. I thought there's the way that you talk about 7s then. But then, as a 3, you have a great deal of common ground, I think, with the 7s, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I, in some ways, envy the 7's like perspective on life.
Yeah.
But I also just think, do you watch the show Schitt's Creek?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay. So the scene where where David and Alexis are having this conversation, and David says, you just float through life. And Alexis, classic 7 move here, she says, I don't float through life. I walk through life in really nice shoes. And a lot of us assume that 7s just float through life. But actually, I think what's really happening for 7s is simply believing that it's possible, that they've already essentially in their minds done it, whatever it is. Just believing that they're capable, that it's possible, that they can do it. That is what makes it possible, because they never question it. And I also have a lot of empathy for 7s because people just dismiss them so much. There's just so much more there that they just, if you're not seeing it, it's because they're not letting you. But there's a lot of depth. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you must see that a lot in organizations, the 7s not being maybe taken seriously just because of some of the behaviors. Thank you so much for those practices. They had a lot of depth to them, and I really liked that a lot. I've already gone over time. Thank you so much. I've loved meeting you and hearing from you.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
The next interview is with Natalia Bolshakova, president and co-founder of Enneagram Egypt. We're going to be speaking about how she uses the Enneagram for teenagers and in schools.